Hey everybody, Pastor Stephen Anderson here from Faithful Word Baptist Church in Phoenix, Arizona with part 5 of my life story. So in 10th grade at Victory Christian, my attitude toward the school started to really go downhill. There were some things that I saw that I felt were very hypocritical, and there were a lot of my friends that started going down a bad path. And so I started to question, like, why am I even here at this Christian school? Let me give you some examples. A bunch of my friend group ended up smoking pot at a party and getting busted and getting in trouble. And I was pretty horrified by that because although as a teenager, yeah, I would goof off and get into trouble here and there or whatever, to me, taking drugs was just way over the line, just wicked, horrible thing to do. And so I was pretty upset about that. And it made me mad and it disturbed me that my friends would do such a thing. And there was one guy in particular that was the instigator who had brought the drugs to the party and had, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I'm assuming peer pressured or got them to do this. And so I was pretty upset at this guy in particular. And I felt that the school just gave him kind of a slap on the wrist because of the fact that his dad was on the board of the school or something. And I knew the rule book really well. And my mom used to even laugh at me about this and kind of poke fun at me because she'd say to me at the beginning of the school year, she'd see me like reading the rule book, sitting at home and just reading through the thing. And she's like, I know why you're reading that rule book, Stephen. It's because you're looking for all the loopholes and you're trying to figure out like how far you can push things without getting in trouble. And you're kind of, and I'm not going to lie, that probably is part of the reason why I was reading. Pretty sure we were assigned to read it and I was just fulfilling the assignment. But, she would laugh about that. And it's kind of true. I did know the rules. And I remember looking up the rules and figuring out like what was supposed to happen to this guy. And then noticing how it didn't happen. He was supposed to be expelled and he can't come back for X amount of time. And then when he comes back, he can't be on the sports team and blah, blah, blah. And there's all this stuff listed. And then I saw the guy just be suspended for a short amount of time. And then he comes back, straight back to the sports team and whatever. That made me upset. Also, at the same time, one of my friends offered me a VHS tape of pornography. And I turned it down, but I was just like, what the heck? Like, we're at a Christian school and I'm being offered a pornography videotape. And then, there were other things like that. And then also in the Bible class, the teacher started teaching like, oh, well, if you don't have works, you're not saved. And it was like over the line where it was really blurring the lines of salvation by faith versus salvation by works. And, that made me upset. And in the past, the school had been doctrinally sound, but I ended up writing a paper for the class, just basically like refuting that teaching. And I really leaned into Romans 4 verse 5, but to him that worketh not, but believeth on him that justifieth the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness, even as David also describeth the blessedness of the man unto whom God imputeth righteousness without works. And that's such a beautiful passage. And, I ended up getting marked down on my paper and it said like, marked down for being unbiblical and for false doctrine because I'm saying salvation is by faith alone, whatever. So anyway, my parents were making a big sacrifice for me to be there. I mean, they're spending a bunch of money, hours in the car, taking me all the way there. And so, I just decided this isn't worth it. And I told my parents, I said, hey, I think I'm just going to finish out in public school for 11th and 12th grade. And of course, they were fine with that. They were only sending me to the Christian school because I wanted to go there. And, I love my parents and I'm super thankful for the fact that they made a lot of sacrifices for us growing up. They loved us and really wanted us to get the best possible education, the best possible upbringing. And they're spending hundreds of dollars back then, to send me to that school. And so I felt bad, like, why am I, going here and they're spending all this money and time and it's not worth it. So I'm going to switch to public school. So my little sister, Lisa, she'd already been in public school for the last 5 years. And so for the first time in 5 years, we were going to be going to school together now at the same school, Wood Creek High School in Roseville, California. And so I remember my sister, Lisa, kind of teasing me and giving me a bad time about the music that I listened to. So I was really into music at this time. And I had very particular musical tastes, and they were not the mainstream at that time. Okay. So I was listening to a lot of electronic music, especially from the 80s. I'm listening to New Order, Simple Minds, Tears for Fears, and a lot of like European kind of techno and stuff. And here's the thing, probably now there's a lot of people that enjoy that as like a retro thing, or maybe it's coming back or it's popular on some level in many ways. But what you have to understand is that in 1997, nobody is listening to this in the mainstream. And that's what my sister Lisa is saying. She's like, you think you're going to go to school and you're going to find friends that listen to your music, and you're wrong, and there's no way that anybody is listening to that stuff and whatever. Because she's saying everybody listen to my music. That's what she's telling me. So anyway, and for the most part, she was probably right about that. But anyway, so I show up on the very first day at Wood Creek High School. I'm in the first class the very first day. I sit down just randomly in a seat, and this Chinese girl is sitting next to me. And I look over at her backpack, and she had like patches on her backpack, and it was like all the bands that I listened to. It was so I'm kind of like So I just hit it off with this girl immediately. She's like, oh, you got to have lunch with me and my friend Anna at lunch today. So the funny thing is, I ended up eating lunch with those two girls that day, and every other day for the entire rest of my high school career. So it was just kind of funny that Lisa had said, you're not going to find anybody with this. And then it was just like first class, first date. So of course I came home and gloated to her about that. But these two friends that I would eat lunch with every day, Helen and Anna, they weren't saved. They weren't Christians. And what's funny is that I virtually never hung out with them except for at lunch, so it was just like, these were just my lunch friends. So I would sit, have lunch with these two girls. It was just the three of us would just sit and have lunch every day. I was never romantically involved with either of them. Neither of them were saved. I tried to give them the gospel, but I was just really bad at presenting the gospel because I'd never been soul winning. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I had not successfully won people to the Lord. And so I tried to, evangelize them, talk to them about Christ and being saved, but I was probably not doing a very good job, not using the Bible, etc. And so they kind of just scoffed at it and had zero interest. But, we bonded over music and just kind of hung out and had lunch together. And what's funny is that I had a very diverse group of friends at Wood Creek, because I had sort of different friends in different classes, and I had my friends that I rode the bus with in the morning, my friends that I had lunch with. It was all very like separate. I didn't really fit into any major friend group. And so I kind of just had like this eclectic group of friends. And what's funny is that I did ride the bus to school every day, even though ultimately I ended up getting a job and getting a car. But because my mom had purchased the bus pass, I felt like, oh, my mom spent money on this bus pass, so I don't want to waste it. And my friends thought I was insane. Like, what you have a car. How are you not driving here every day? Because that was like the cool thing when you're a teenager, like pull up in your own car and whatever. And I just rode the bus every day. So I kind of had, friends that I rode the bus with, and friends here and friends there. One friend in particular stands out. So I had this cooking class first thing in the morning. And that's where I met this guy, Michael. And he was a black guy. And he had just a huge afro, which again, probably now is kind of common. You'll see black people today like sporting the afro. But again, like in 1997, it was like something that just, you never saw anyone else do. Like all the other black kids had short hair. This guy had a big afro, and he had like a pick, like those combs. I think it's called a pick that women use. He just had a big afro with a pick sticking out of it, which I felt like in 1997 was a pretty bold move at the time. And so this guy and we hit it off. We were good friends, and we had this cooking class together. And the cooking class was first thing in the morning, and we cooked virtually every day. And the teacher would have us just cook something small, like we're cooking like one thing, like whether it's a side dish or it wasn't a complete meal. It was just like one item that we would learn how to cook that day. And so, we were in a group where we were at our table with the six of us. And my particular group, we decided like, we want to do more because the teacher, she said, if you want to bring in like extra food to round out the meal or whatever, you can do that. This is an hour and a half long cooking class. And it was first thing in the morning. So I felt like breakfast, So I ended up really influencing the people in my group and saying like, hey, we should turn this into like a big meal every day. And so we would all like sign up for things in our group. And we were the only group that did this, where we would just bring tons of food and just make like a full blown meal every day in this class. And so we had a lot of fun with that class. And the funny thing is that I didn't even sign up for that cooking class. 11th grade, I signed up for, the particular classes I wanted. And then I get my schedule handed to me and it says, cooking. I'm like, what the heck? Cooking? What? I'm taking that. I was horrified, as a teenage boy, like, why would I want to take a cooking class? It sounds girly or stupid or whatever. So I end up like going into the office and saying, hey, this is a mistake. I didn't sign up for this. I don't want to be in a cooking class. And the teacher's like, are you serious right now? She's like, you've won the lottery. She said, everybody signs up for this cooking class and barely anybody gets in. And usually juniors can never get in. Usually it's only seniors that get in. And she's like, you just happened to get thrown into this class. You didn't even ask for it. She's like, trust me, you want to be in this class. And I was like, oh, well, okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, then I guess I'll do it. And of course, the advisor was right because it did end up being a super cool, fun class. But yeah, so my friend Michael from this class, it's funny because I'd be hanging around with other friends that were more, I don't know, my demographic in Wood Creek. And then, Michael would walk up to me and he would, he and I would do some like elaborate handshake without saying a word. And then he would just walk away. And the friends that I was with would just be like, how do you know that guy? like you're friends with this? Who is this guy? Because a lot of people in high school, they tend to be in a certain clique, whereas I was just kind of a crossover guy that didn't really fit into a particular group. So, and then also my friend Michael, he would get like the government assistance breakfast and lunch. And they had just these amazing cinnamon rolls that were the breakfast. It was like a Cinnabon type of situation. And so every once in a while, Michael would be like, oh, I don't feel like my cinnamon roll or whatever. And so he'd give me that voucher and I'd get to eat his cinnamon roll. So the only time I didn't eat lunch with Helen and Anna was when there was this Bible club that would happen like once a week. Sometimes I would go to that, and that was the only time I didn't eat with them. And at this Bible club, it was a chance to meet other evangelical Christians on campus. And actually, one time I even got to preach in the Bible club because there'd be like a little sermonette delivered by one of the teenagers. And so I got to preach one time, and I ended up preaching on hell out of Luke chapter 16. And it was a little bit shocking to some people just because a lot of them were used to these really liberal churches where hell is just never mentioned virtually at all. So around that time also, I got my first job, as I mentioned earlier, at Round Table Pizza. And so when I worked at Round Table Pizza, I walked in on the first day and one of the supervisors looked at me and said, "It's Guile." Because I had bleached blonde hair at the time, and it kind of was stuck out in a weird way. And again, this was not the style at the time. Like a few years later, you'd see other people doing it, but it was a little bit anachronistic, I guess you could say. But so I had this blonde hair that kind of did the Guile number. And so, that name just stuck. So I worked at Round Table for like 3 years, and everyone there just called me Guile. And even on the schedule, a lot of times it would just be written like Guile. And then these are the hours or whatever. And then Halloween was the busiest night of the year at Round Table Pizza. So I actually dressed up as Guile. And so I had like a white t-shirt, the dog tags, the camouflage pants, and the hair was already there. So another funny thing that happened when I was at Wood Creek is there was this girl that I would walk by every day when I was in 11th grade, and I would always say hi to her. She'd say hi to me, and we didn't know each other at all. But you're on a routine where you're kind of going to the same classes over and over again, and everybody's going the same direction at the same time. So I would see this girl every day and greet her, and we didn't know each other. But then later, we ended up having class together, and we hit it off. We were friends. We would hang out. She was Mormon, and I tried to give her the gospel one time, and I spent like an hour and a half preaching to her, and she just would not accept it. She just said, you could show me anything in the Bible, and it's never going to change what I believe because I know what I felt. Okay. But the funny part is that her last name was Anderson, but I didn't think anything of this because Anderson is such a common name, and there are all kinds of Andersons. In the phone book, there were like 6 pages of Andersons or whatever in Sacramento. But we ended up having this history class together, and we were supposed to do an oral report about our family tree. So I start giving my oral report about my family tree, and she's like, whoa, this sounds pretty familiar. And it turned out that she was my second cousin once removed. So that was kind of funny that we had just kind of known each other for so long, and we became friends. We're hanging out all the time and had no idea that we were related to one another in a city of, 2 million people. So my main hobbies around this time were kickboxing, collecting records, and, playing music on my keyboard. And I had synthesizers and stuff like that. Played a little bit of guitar, but mainly keyboards. And I would go to kickboxing like 5 days a week. So I was really into that. I really liked that. But I would spend a lot of time in record stores, just going through the bargain bins and just kind of searching for that pearl of great price, of just finding that gem of some rare, cool, collectible record from something that I was interested in. So I'd go to record stores a lot, and I would also go to used bookstores a lot. And I would, buy a lot of books. I read a lot of books at that time. And one time I was coming out of the used bookstore, and this guy rolls up on a bicycle, and he says to me, hey, kid, you want to go to church? And he hands me an invite to Regency Baptist Church. And the way the invite was folded, it didn't say on the outside of it, Regency Baptist Church. It said, if you died today, do you know for sure you want to go to heaven? And so this guy rolls up, hands me that, and I look at it, and I see that question, and I open it up and see it says Regency Baptist Church. And I say to the guy, I said, yes, I do know that I'm going to heaven. And I said, I am also Baptist. And I said, I'm a saved Christian. And, I go to a Baptist church. And he says to me, yeah, but does your church go out and preach the gospel and tell people how to get saved? And I said, well, no, but we should do that. And he said, amen. And then he just rode off. And I really wanted to talk more to the guy. I was super interested. I thought it was kind of weird that he just rolled up, gave me that invitation, and then asked me that question. And then I said, no, but we should do that. And then he just leaves. And I wanted to talk more. But here's the thing about that question, more than anything else, was the question that would have gotten my attention. Okay. And it did get my attention because I, at this time, just had a burning desire to get my friends saved. I'm going to school every day. I'm around all these unsaved people, and I really wanted to evangelize. I really wanted to get people saved. And I felt like I was just a total failure in that area because I wasn't getting anyone saved. And I used to pray when I was a teenager every single night for years. I would pray, God, please just allow me to get one person saved in my entire life. And, that seemed like a big goal to me. That just seemed like an amazing thing. Wow, if I could win someone to Christ, that would be so cool. Looking back, I think about it, and God probably answered that prayer every single time that I prayed it. Like, I've probably gotten someone saved for every time I prayed the prayer, even though I prayed it hundreds or even thousands of times. but that's what I prayed. That was my burden of my heart. And so when this guy said that to me, man, that resonated with me so much. Like, wow, you guys go out and knock doors and get people saved. That's awesome. So that really got my attention. And we'd been going to just these liberal, watered down kind of fun center Baptist churches for the last 5 years or whatever. And so I ended up bringing that invite home to my parents. And I said, this is where we should be going to church. And so they checked it out, because not only did it say that about the gospel, but on the inside, it kind of listed independent, fundamental, King James, non-charismatic, traditional music. Like, it's just all these bullet points. And so I showed that to my parents, and they're like, yeah, this looks good. We'll try it. Because they weren't satisfied with the churches we were going to either. Like, we were all kind of just dissatisfied with the lame churches we were going to. So the first day that my parents ended up going to Regency, I ended up being sick. So I didn't go with them. So I stayed home because I had a cold or whatever. And they show up at the church and they loved it. But they come home, and I asked my dad, I'm like, so how was that church? What was it like? And my dad's like, well, he said, we really like it. But he's like, I just don't think that you kids can handle. I don't know if you guys can handle this preaching, because he said, this is some hard preaching. And I'm like, Dad, I can handle the hard preaching, Dad. I went to summer camp, and, the preacher was preaching hard, and I liked it. I like that stuff. And he's like, I don't know, Steve. I don't think you can. I don't know if you're ready for this, because this is some hard preaching. I'm like, I can handle it. So then I ended up going the next Sunday, and the preaching was hard, and it was awesome, and I loved it. So on the next Sunday when I go to the church, the first thing I do is look for the guy that gave me that invite. And I couldn't find him anywhere in the church. Nobody looked like him. And I'm looking around trying to identify the guy. And, I asked somebody, I kind of described the guy, and they said, oh, well, that sounds like the pastor, But I'm looking at the pastor, I'm thinking like, I don't think that that's who it was. So I went up and I talked to the pastor, and I said, do you ride a bike? Did you ride a bike in Roseville? And he didn't. And so I'm like, well, then it couldn't have been you that gave it to me, but I can't figure out who gave me the invite. And I never did figure that out. And so that just shows how God really worked it out that I would get that invite, because it wasn't even a church member that gave it to me. So either it was just maybe somebody who was visiting, or sometimes maybe visitors or missionaries will just kind of grab a stack of invites from the church that they're visiting and just use it for soul winning while they're on the road. I've done that before, where I'm working out of town or something. I'll grab the local church's invites and then, go soul winning with it or whatever, even though I've never been to the church, never going to go to the church. Or, I thought about maybe it was just an angel unawares. But either way, whether this was just a supernatural thing where God sent an angel, because the Bible says, be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares, thinking that you're dealing with a human being and it's actually an angel that was sent. And so I wondered that, is this an angel, or was this just, some kind of a visiting missionary? But either way, God sent this guy. Either God used circumstances to send a human being that was just, happened to be traveling through, or, something supernatural, an angel that gave it to me. But either way, this was like exactly what I needed at this exact time in my life. I just started recently, like, reading my Bible cover to cover, really wanting to evangelize, really wanting to get serious about my walk with God. But I had no direction. I had no mentor. I had no good preaching. I had no good church to send me out soul winning and teach me how to do it. I didn't know how to do soul winning. I'd never been door-to-door soul winning, didn't know what to do. And so, this guy who gave me that tract, just right place, right time, perfect church for me at that time, that ended up just dramatically changing my life. And as soon as I got into Regency, it's like, boom, I got into soul winning. I started growing in the Lord, just super transformative. And, I ended up not only getting people saved door to door, but I started to use those skills that I was learning to get people saved at school and at work and in my family and everything. So, Regency ended up being a huge part of my life. And I'll talk about that more in a later video. God bless you. Have a great day.